Right, over to you, Alan.
So it's nice to see you. My name's Al. I don't recognize all of you. Um, I've been around Beyond Recovery now for, blimey, about 5 years, I think. Um, and I've been in the buddy scheme since it was, since it was dreamed up, I guess, when we stopped being able to go into prisons around lockdown. Um, and I love the idea of it. It seemed like such a it seemed like such an obvious thing to do, but only once the situation kind of demanded it. But it's just turned into something really beautiful now, and all of the structure around it and everything. It just seems like a lovely thing to do. I've written to about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 guys over the last few years. Um, I I seem to get people just as they're leaving. So I've had a few. Um, I'm still in touch with a couple of people that have left after I wrote to them, which is cool. Um, but it always feels to me to be that lovely way that you can kind of touch people with, the way that you write. For me, anyway, I don't know, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this. What I thought I'd do was I'd chat for a little bit until I run out of steam, and then we can have questions and maybe something that if there's stuff that I haven't covered or whatever. But if you've got any questions, then stick your hands up and jump in, because that's how I love to run anything like this. Um, yeah, it seemed to me that it was such an obvious thing to do as soon as it became necessary. And what I've noticed is that first of all, I've really got into my head about trying to communicate with these guys that were usually in front of me by letter, and I didn't really understand how that was going to work. It all felt a bit kind of stilted for me initially. I don't know if you've had the same experience, but as soon as I started to kind of ground myself a little bit, kind of feel myself grounded while I was writing, I noticed that it all got more natural. And then the responses got more natural after that. And it seems to me that it's the same as when you're with somebody, when you're kind of you drop in and you're really with them, they can feel it. And it feels to me it's the same with the writing. When you drop into the writing and you're not in your head about what you need to write or whatever, you're just in a bit of a flow with something. And of course we go in and out when we're writing. Then I felt like the response I was getting was warmer, so maybe they felt something warmer from my from my writing. It just kind of all felt easier. Um, but for me, what really helped, and I suppose what I wanted to talk about tonight really, was that I started to drop into those moments when we'd been inside with the guys and they talked about getting letters from their families or letters from their girlfriends or letters from somebody, and the excitement that they had from that, the warmth that they had from that, the fact that they'd often bring those letters into group for us to read, or particularly the lads that didn't feel like their writing was very good, or they hadn't learned to write, some of them. So then they would ask us to help with how to respond or what something meant, or they get us to read something to them. And there was just something so warm, so connecting about that process of being involved in what it can be about nothing, but it's an intimate letter between them and their loved ones. So now I think if I remind myself, I don't always, I guess, but if I'm talking to anybody that's been inside and I remind myself about that feeling, about how it felt to see their faces once they'd connected to somebody from the outside and how important that can be to people, then suddenly all of this makes perfect sense. And I get really, deeply committed and involved in that moment in what I'm writing. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what it was like to run groups inside, because and please jump in with questions because I've got nothing in my head at the moment, so it'll just come out as it comes out. But working backwards, when COVID came along, Jacqueline and I kind of decided that I would continue to go into Onley on a weekly basis for as long as I could keep going in there. And at the time, we were kind of talking to Safer Custody, which is the department in prison that looks after people that they feel are vulnerable. So if anybody has a kind of a vulnerable moment, then they tend to get pushed across to Safer Custody. They get the name, and then they send somebody to have a chat with the guys and find out where they are and see if they need any extra help. And of course, as soon as COVID came along, then the whole system just went out the window, and everybody just tried to do the best they could with what they had. But for these few months, I can't remember how long it was, Jacqueline will remember, but I think, because it started in March, and I think we were still going in November. So I was just going in roughly once a week, every 2 weeks. Going in, I'd go to Safer Custody and say to them, have you got a list for me? And they produce a list of guys that were struggling that week. You know, often the same people were on the list. And then I'd have a list that me and Jacqueline had discussed, the people that I wanted to go and see. And then I'd kind of like, by then I knew the prison really well, so I'd work out my route and I'd try and find a quick way of getting to as many of these people as possible, which usually meant going, you know, in through one wing, because the wings are side by side going in through one wing and then back through the other one and then skipping one and then going in through and back through. And I got away with that I got away with it because presumably that I shouldn't really have been doing it. But I got away with that for about 6 or 7 months. And it was such a lovely time then. And I think it was so lovely because we knew, you know, I was coming out and then going to have lunch with Jacqueline afterwards so that we could kind of decompress a bit, and then I'd go home. And we knew at that time that everything was closing down and these guys were starting to get, you know, 23-hour lockup, and they were starting to lose staff. So of course, as soon as they lost staff, then the lockup thing became even more important because they just didn't have the people to be able to create the food system or any of the other systems. So all of the systems just got streamlined. So the guys would come out maybe for an hour. They would have to have a shower, collect their food, which was obviously cold because they'd have to collect it for the day. And then they'd have to do any kind of prison stuff they had to do and any phone calls. All of that would have to get done in an hour, and everyone was coming out in the same hour. So of course, people weren't getting the connection that they wanted. So it felt to us it was even more important that we just tried to have this time in there. And in the end, because I was so low on time, I was finding 4 or 5 of the guys, particularly from one unit that I'd been running a group with the year before, and running a little impromptu group with them after I'd done my other visits. And we did a lot in prison. We did Nottingham and Onley and all sorts of things that were fantastic, and I really enjoyed them. But that few months of running those impromptu groups with some really disparate guys, you know, a couple of the guys really felt like they'd seen something about the principles. We didn't really talk about it in those terms, but they'd seen something about themselves that had lifted them. And then 2 or 3 other guys, one guy in particular, I remember him really well, just couldn't look up. So he would come into group with us because I'd go and knock for him, and I was allowed to kind of knock for anybody who wasn't, you know, on some sort of special measures. So I'd go and knock for him and he'd come in and his head would be down. And then he'd come and sit down and his head would be down. And I'd try and speak to him a little bit in group, but he wouldn't respond. And one of the guys that came in with us, who was really seeing something fresh, he'd taken the trouble to kind of look after this guy. So out of all of us, he was the one that could kind of communicate with him a bit. And at the end of every group, I'd say to him, you okay? And he'd go, he'd nod his head, but he wouldn't say anything at all. This guy, I think in the mid-40s, but he looked a lot older. He obviously had a tough existence. And this other guy would have a little conversation with him and he wouldn't say very much, and then they'd all go back. And then we just got these groups got a kind of an energy of their own. So it just got, there was a system inside called Phoenix Initiative or something, and they looked after the mental health of the guys, and they kind of understood a little bit of what we were doing, and so they would find people for us as well. But they were on this particular wing that I was working on, and I would find out from them the week after that this guy who couldn't speak, couldn't look at me, would say one or two more words each week. There was something just waking up in him, just the tiniest thing waking up in him. And I've got to say that getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and driving from London up to Onley and all of the things that day involved just got so much easier when I saw these tiny little incremental improvements in this guy's life. And they were so tiny. I mean, they were mostly barely worth mentioning. But there was just something happening with him where he started to trust the world a little bit again. And I guess I wanted to say this because it's been a long time since I've thought about it. But actually, Jacqueline's book came through today, the electronic version of it. And so I just had a little skim through the first few pages. And that's the first thing that came into my mind was those groups that we ran, as I say, very much unofficially. And as soon as they kind of, in November, whenever it was that they decided, okay, we've got a lockdown now, then that was it. I turned up one day and they just wouldn't let me in anymore. And then we never went, as far as I know anyway. I don't know what Jacqueline's done, but I never went into Onley again after that. But if you ever wonder about the energetic connection that you're making to someone by writing to them, then I invite you to take a little bit of the energy of this story with you, because this guy, I never had a conversation with him. I think he might have said hello to me or goodbye to me a couple of times. But I would hear from the girls in the Phoenix office who saw him every day and were kind of much better at, just kind of consistently getting him to say something, or maybe he'd have to ask them for something, so he'd have to speak to them. And just hearing about these little incremental improvements that would happen for him. The other guys would have these, big aha moments, and, they'd have I don't know, a letter to their girlfriend, which would just go much better than the month before or something. So they were much more dramatic, and I would obviously tell Jacqueline about those. But for me being there and for all of that running around and everything that I did, he really sticks in my mind as somebody that felt like he was really languishing where he was, and that he needed to hear something about himself that wasn't being gifted to him in any other way other than these group chats that, he, I, and maybe 3 or 4 other lads were having. And because they were run impromptu and because they were kind of unofficial, I didn't really talk about the principles. I would just go in there and chat to them and ask them about their week, and and as they would tell me, and I would try and, as much as I could with everything that I had going on in my head, I would try and deeply listen to them, and we would try and create this space of appreciation for everybody's stories. And that's all we did, really. We didn't really run groups in the traditional sense that, that I did with Jacqueline when we were doing Nottingham and things. I just offered them a space. I thought this was in my intention to offer them a space of quiet for the week and to offer them a little place where they were listened to. And so if you ever wonder what difference you can make, I offer you to take something from that. It can be so small, but it can make such a difference to people when they are in that place of absolute surety about how broken they are. And some people, you know, working in prisons particularly, but now on the outside as well, there are people walking around with, and I'm sure you've all got your own stories too, a head full of their own brokenness. There's something a bit of listening to that can shift the energy on that. So you don't really need to know anything about the principles other than, you know, the energetic way that it's changed your life. I'd always say to people that that's the first thing to go in with. Never mind about what you're going to say or how you're going to describe Sid or, you know, how you're going to talk about thought or any of that stuff. But just go in with that energetic feeling of how it's changed your life, and then listen from there. This is completely off topic, but I remember I lost my mum last year, and I tried to teach her a little bit about the principles because she was 90 odd years old, and I could see how much she was struggling, and I really wanted her to have a better experience of life. And I would see her regularly, about once a week, towards the end anyway. And she would say to me, she was so intuitive, and I didn't see it. I was the one that was closed off because I thought I knew her, right? And she would say to me, "Stop coaching me." And I would think, I'm not coaching you, I'm just listening. But I must have been listening with some intent, you know? And she could smell out sniff out that intent in me. And I didn't know what to do about that. So I just did the best I could for a while, you know, and then at some point, but years down the line, I think, again, working in prisons, because it was such a good basis for me to really absorb myself and my own experience, and to, you know, to not keep on projecting onto other people, because, you know, being in prison was complicated and difficult, and it was noisy, and I don't like noise. So there was all sorts of things going on that I didn't like, and I had to just get used to not liking them and just get on with stuff anyway. But at some point, I don't know when it was, I was driving to Mum's, and I just thought, I'm going to listen today. I'm quiet today. I'm going to listen today. And so I went in and I said hello to her, and she started talking about the neighbours, and she'd had a row with a woman up the hallway, which was so fascinating for me, because the one thing, my mum was quite dogged in the way that she was with a lot of people, but she wouldn't argue with strangers or people that she didn't know very well. You know, she'd just keep her mouth shut and then complain to whoever. But she'd been openly arguing with this woman at the end of the hallway, and part of me was kind of proud of her, you know. Part of me was kind of relieved that she was, you know, finding her voice, finding a irritated, angry voice. And then part of me knew that, you know, she would just beat herself up about it afterwards. So anyway, I went in this day, and I decided to be really quiet. And I must have been quiet in a different way, and she must have been in a particular place in her head as well, because she sat there and she complained about this woman for 25 minutes or so, and I played along for the first time in a long time. You know, instead of just being quiet with her, I just went, yeah, that's not right. You know, that's not. I just found myself being as I used to be with her, you know, which was having a bitch about people and, you know, just kind of the usual stuff that I used to do with her until I found out about the principles. And then at some point, I noticed her just brighten up. And we either went on then to have a 2-hour conversation together, which was the only time we'd had that kind of depth of conversation without alcohol being involved, or, at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And I really got to see her for the first time. And my insight from that, and it's difficult putting insights into words as far as I'm concerned, but my insight into that was, oh, I don't have to behave in a different way with anybody. I can just let them completely be themselves. All I have to know is where my quietness is. I don't have to exercise it. I just have to know where it is. I can be with anybody while they're expressing themselves. And then when they feel safe and comfortable, then there can be a change in energetics between you and them, or in the conversation, which can be helpful for me or them. And suddenly there was this really kind of nuanced, subtle change in the way that I worked. And now I think of that experience every time I turn up with a client and the Zoom pops up and they're crying, or, they've literally just come out of an argument with a partner, or, they're in a quiet office and they've had a terrible day and they're having to whisper about it. I kind of remember that day with my mum when I was just able to just be there with her, fully be there with her, experiencing what's going on for her. And I learned that by being in difficult situations in prison. I think something about the fiery kind of experience of that, the sink or swim experience of that, was just created this understanding that I could be with anybody, whatever they were experiencing. And I would know if I was caught up. And as long as I knew if I was caught up, then it was okay. If I can feel my own caught upness, then that's really useful for me, because then I know if I'm leading the witness, then I know if I'm just kind of throwing some fuel into the situation, or whether I'm just being with someone. So that was really, really useful to me. I'm going to pause and just ask if anybody, what people are hearing, or whether there's any questions that you've got.
I'm just really grateful to you for sharing all of that. It really, really resonated what you were saying about, just being present, just getting out of your head and stopping trying to coach. I find the more that I have in my mind, oh, I know what the answer is, or I know how to help this person, the less I end up influencing them. But when I don't even think I'm helping somebody, that's when afterwards somebody will say, oh, it was really helpful talking to you. That it's, and even though it keeps happening, I still go in with the intent. So it's just, I think you've helped me to sort of, I'll have a little mental flag now to just check in before I see anyone, and turn my internal dialogue off.
Thanks for saying that, Erica. It's so easy, isn't it, when someone's really noisy or caught up? It's so easy to try and lay the ground for them, to kind of go in with this quietness or something, so that they can see it or whatever. I don't know. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I do know what I'm trying to say. That's what I used to do. I used to go in and think, okay, I can provide something here that can help them to calm down. And it wasn't that. Really, it just wasn't that. What really helped is you just pointed to, which was me going in and just be myself, not going with any expectation about what what they might need from me at all. Yeah, it's just really useful. And I think it's like, yeah, I might be wrong, and I'd love to hear, but I think it's kind of one of the layers that gets left out, because I listened to Michael Neill's book. This is a story that you may have heard before, so I won't tell you too much because it will bore you. But I listened to Neill's book, I think, over 5 days, 3 times. And halfway through the third time, I just switched it off and just thought, okay, I don't need to listen to this anymore. You know, I've been a searcher my whole life. I've been seeking my whole life. And suddenly Michael Neill's book, you know, the Inside Out Revolution, just described everything that I thought that I'd been feeling. But I couldn't talk about the principles after that. I couldn't. I had no idea what had happened to me. I assumed that it was temporary until it wasn't temporary. And then, of course, you know, I had a glitch, and then it felt like it was temporary. And then it was so much going on. But when I started to talk about this stuff, I wasn't able to hear about the nuances of where it can be easier to be with people when you notice that when you notice that you have a bit of an agenda. And, you know, check it out for yourself. But I mean, for me, I always had a bit of an agenda. I always had a little bit of oh, bless you, you know, wherever you are now, bless you, you know, I can do something here. But I'd be quiet and just kind of, you know, I wouldn't say something like that because that would be inappropriate. But I would be thinking it and bringing it, and I didn't realize that they could hear it at some level. At least I assume that that's the situation, because now when I go in empty, people will tell me how they're really feeling without, you know, without so many of the backstops, because they're worried that I'm going to judge them in some way or another. And so you can get into the conversation a lot quicker, I think, by listening to 25 minutes of somebody's nonsense, you know, from that moment or from that day or whatever it is. I have a lot of my own nonsense, as you can imagine. You can get there a lot quicker by doing that and then waiting for them to naturally finish than you can by breaking in and going, you know, have you thought about doing this? Or are you sure that's a difficult, you know, and all of that kind of very coachy stuff that a lot of us have been inundated with over the time that we've been wanting to be coaches. For anybody else that has come from traditional coaching, psychological based coaching, as I did, you know, I had a lot of noise in my head about what coaching was. And yeah, I find it a lot simpler than that now. I'm gonna have another sip of my tea.
Oh, yeah, it's lovely what you've been saying there. I shared this on some other group because we're talking about listening here. And we know when we listen to people that the answer they're looking for is inside them. You know, we've all got our own answers. We don't realize it. And I see it as it's like they're taking a train journey. We've just got to sit there and allow them to take their journey, and they don't know where it's going to go, and they'll talk away, and we can just be there to listen, and they'll know when they get to their destination. But if we do interrupt with something, trying to fix, that train takes another route. It goes off track. And affects the natural destination, the natural course it was taking. So in some ways, if we can do it, listening is easy, just to sit there, you know, give the nods, the whatever, you know, just be ourselves, but let them take their journey, because they're going to find their answer, aren't they? Or just a good feeling along the way, aren't they? Like you said, in prison. It's just letting them take their own journey. We don't have to interrupt it and let it take. I remember when I did the one thought training thing, and they taught us about listening, and we had to, as part of it, find people to listen to. And I remember being so scared at the beginning. And with the one thought thing, they did say just sit there quietly and don't say a word for up to an hour, which, you know, I'm thinking, look at the clock. But it was interesting because I listened to 3 different people, you know, a few times. And every one of them, there was no questions. They didn't even have a problem. They just talked to me. And every one of them ended up crying in a happy way because I was just listening, you know. It was a struggle for me at the beginning, but then that's how I learned that you just let them take this train journey with their talking and with their thoughts. And they find this way. They find their destination. That's like you say when someone says, oh, thanks for listening, and you feel like you haven't done anything. It's just a little train journey you allow someone to go on, and they'll get where they need to be, and they don't have to even find their answer, do they? It's fascinating. Yeah.
That's beautiful, Wendy. I love that analogy. I hadn't thought of it like that, but it does feel like it, doesn't it? When you're with someone that's got a noisy head and you're impatient, like we all are sometimes, and you jump in with your good idea. And then you see that it just ramps it up.
Yeah. Well, we've all done it at buses. I mean, I have at a bus stop. Someone perhaps lonely or whatever just chatted to you, and you've just sat there. Yeah. And then, you know, if you look back, you can see they just feel good because you just give them a bit of time and space. You give them a little bit of your energy, aren't you?
Yeah.
Really...
Yeah. It makes understanding, you know, what can feel like a kind of a spiritual message or a spiritual teaching. It makes it, to me, it makes it feel so much more natural to share it in that way.
Yeah. I think with listening in the past, maybe we've thought or learned that there was a thing to do, you know, almost like you had to go to a school of how to listen, but there isn't. And I think, you know, the old listening is that you've got to listen to fix, which, you know, isn't the case, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Mavis Khan's book is always a good place to look when I've sent it to so many clients now. It's so simple. Most people think it's too simple until they read it for the 3rd or 4th time, and then they see that actually that simplicity is exactly what they need to hear. Because as you say, we're so used to, you know, I remember doing NLP, so, you know, you used to hear about nodding along and, you know, and mirroring and all of this kind of stuff. And all of that's great. And I'm sure in some circumstances with some people, there's some benefit there for a client. But actually, all it did was fill my head with all of these things. And even once I'd learned all the tools, there was still, like, the gear change was still going on, you know, like driving. There's something about it that just kind of, you still feel like you're doing something, you know. And with this, when it goes well for me, and I don't know if you feel this as well, Wendy, when it goes well for me, I literally feel like there's a quietness in me, you know, there's the stillness in the forest, there's just the rustling of the leaves. And then there's the clarity of what the other person is saying. Just this beautiful clarity of them telling you how they see the world in that moment. And then a question will come at some point. And then, you know, they won't be ready. So I'll let that disappear. And then another question will come. And then maybe I'll search back for the question that I had before or whatever. But it's just, yeah. I had no idea that working with people could have all of that simplicity to it. And that when I'm tired, caught up, noisy headed, you know, etc., 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 all the fingers, right? I've got one for each finger. that I will make it so complicated for myself until I hear that quietness again. And then as soon as I hear that quietness, it's like a door opens. You know, okay, right. You know, it's usually the usual instruction is shut up now, Al. Gently for myself, obviously, but I quite like. I don't put too much store. I'm a writer, so I don't put too much store around the words as opposed to the way that I use them. But shut up, Al usually works for me, and then I go back into my little space again. It's yeah, it's glorious. Is there any other questions or points of things that you're hearing?
Can I just ask about, it's not really about anything to do with the buddies, but just about what you've been just talking about. You said, I think you said something about not necessarily articulate when you're with a client or whatever, not necessarily articulating the principles, but just being the principles, because that's what we are. Is that across the board? So do you ever go into a bit of the detail of what the principles are, or do you just find that it's easier and more effective to just be? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So tell me if I'm answering the question or not. So what occurs to me these days is that there are different ways for me to talk about this stuff. And there are people that I'll talk to, particularly people maybe who are in business or who've got quite a fast brain, who will say, so what is it? What is it that we're here to talk about? And then there's a little thing in my head for that. You know, I've got a kind of an easy response, which feels like it suits the moment. You know, when I say that, you know, I'll talk about the experience before psychology, or I'll talk about, we're here to talk about that, you know, something that you might not have heard before, or I've seen how easy it is when I was caught up in a really difficult space, which is usually captures people's attention. Because I think when you turn up and you're quite soft, and they can feel the calmness in you, then they'll automatically assume that you've always been like that, and you've just come to teach them something. You know, like when I was a kid, there were like 2 or 3 teachers. I think my domestic science teacher, particularly, and I'd learned to cook at home, so there was nothing much going on in domestic science for me because most of it I already knew. It felt a bit reductive, but she was amazing. She was just this woman who cared about kids, and it emanated from her. And I didn't know that as a kid, but I felt it. So I used to just love being in her classes with her, you know? And yet I had other teachers who had big personalities and they were fun to be around and all of that. But I didn't get the same as I got from her. From her, I got this real kind of comforting, warm feeling, like, you know, I could tell her if there's anything that was going on with me or whatever. And when I look back at that now, I just think, oh yeah, that's what I was seeing in her. And then in other people, I was seeing this big, friendly, you know, fun personality, but also if you're not matched in energy with that person, then it can be difficult to kind of get around it. And I'm not saying that I want to hang out with people all the time that are calm. Far from it, actually, because I'm far too calm for my own good most of the time. So far too soft for my own good. So I kind of like being around people that are, you know, a little bit kind of sharp and jaggedy and whatever, because it just kind of, I don't know. Anyway, you don't need to know that. But I think that people assume that you are who you are when you arrive. So they never know that you've been through the same things as them. And you can tell them, but sometimes you can hear really quickly, as Wendy was saying it earlier on, you know, you see the train going down the track and you hear the story and you connect with a part of it and you think, oh, mate, yeah, that was me. That was definitely me. So that's where I go. I just think, oh, yeah, that's where they are. And then that's where I go. I go into that part of my history. And let's face it, you know, the place that I can still go now, because there's always those places. They're never gone. They're just, you know, I don't think I've spoken to you guys for a while. So last year I lost my mum and my dad within 6 months of each other. And I really thought I was coping well. You know, I was kind of seeing them a lot at the time. So we were very close. And I was the only one of my siblings that could deal with the aftermath of it and all of that. But I just thought, no, it's okay, because I know the principles, right? So this is good. I'm glad it's me. You know, I'm glad it's not my sister in America, and I'm glad it's not my brother who works all the hours God sends, because, you know, it's better that it's me, because, you know, I've got the time and the headspace and all of that to do it. But that wasn't true. It was true for a while, and I did deal with it really well, and I cried when I needed to, and you know, I kind of had blanket days over my head when I needed to, and I just thought, yeah, I'm dealing with this really well. And then when my mum went in November, and you know, after 2 or 3 weeks, when we've dealt with all the kind of the semantics around her death, I just collapsed into a really dark place for about 5 weeks. And then really annoyingly, on the 3rd of January, because I really hate the 1st of January thing, I think there's, you know, there's nothing in there for me. I just think that the whole kind of, you know, New Year's resolution thing is a load of nonsense. So irritatingly for me, on the 3rd of January, I just popped up. I popped up out of all of that noisy thinking that I didn't know was there. I just thought I was suffering from grief from my parents. But actually, no, I just created a load of noise around that feeling, you know? There was the grief, and then there was the noise that I created. And then there was the layers of all the other things that I didn't know what they were. They just felt like they were really heavy. And then the 3rd of January, I literally popped up like a top. And I can say this to you guys because I hope that you'll hear it in the way that I mean it. I popped up in a way with a level of view that I'd never had before. I felt so connected to everything. And that went on for weeks, if not months. This level of connection that I just thought, oh my word, does it take for me to lose the two most important people in my life for me to feel this good? And that, of course, is a dodgy connection to two things. But what had happened was I feel like I was so kind of noisy for so long, and then suddenly, you know, my physiology, whatever it is, my spirituality had just kind of seen it and let it go. It had just let it go. And then I just felt like I had this really beautiful experience, which is the perfect timing, because I'm lucky enough here to live by the sea, and I'm south facing, and so the moon goes down in a particular place I can see from the lounge. And so I placed my parents there. I placed my parents and my 2 ex-partners that I've lost, and somebody else that was really important to me. And I placed them all there, and now that's where they live. And I have this kind of connection to them, which just feels really beautiful. I have it in my head, of course, because that seems the appropriate place to have it. And I had this new experience with these people that I never had before. I had this feeling that their essence, whatever it was that they left behind in me, is still really strongly in me. This has got nothing to do with the principles. It's just got everything to do with seeing who I am as a spiritual being. And that came from learning the principles. And now it's turned into this just open experience of the world and who people can be and who I can be. So if any of this makes any sense or resonates with anybody, I'm grateful. If it doesn't, then that's fine. Just push it to one side. But the principles themselves, I grappled so long to try and work out what they were, because I felt so good after hearing of the initial dunk of them. When I had my initial dunk, I felt so good after that. I grappled around to try and kind of deal with all of the other stuff that was in my head. But actually, once I think you're in this conversation and you start to be open, then life just gives you what you can deal with. It gives you it opens up where you are. And then you see more simplicity, more simplicity, more simplicity. And for me, I saw this, I was creaking under grief for a while. And then I literally popped up from, and it was so quick that there couldn't possibly have been any intellectual intervention in that. It was just like as I woke up on the 3rd of January, I woke up a new person with all of that experience of the year before, but with this newfound appreciation of everything that I'd ever had with my parents. And as it is in November now, I have not gone back there. It's really interesting. So I offer that for no reason other than that's who I am when I share the principles now. That's who I am. I'm this person that a little bit more, tiny bit more appreciates the enormity of my makeup, of who I am and how I understand the world. And then I talk from there. And then when people ask me specific questions about things, you know, when they get into lecture and they want, then I've got a pack full of stuff here that I can put on screen, or, you know, I've got little drawings that I've got or whatever. And I use all of that when it feels like that is the appropriate thing to use. But I never think about any of that stuff before I go into a conversation with a client. Like I had no idea like what I was going to talk to you guys about. None whatsoever. I had one little inkling of that little group that I used to run in on. But other than that, I had no idea. So yeah. Cool, eh? I'm gonna shut up again now.
Thank you. I can't even remember what my question was, but strangely, I think you've answered it. Certainly answered something anyway.
I do the same writing course that Jacqueline does, and I've been doing it for a little bit shorter time than she has. And the way I see it is that we, you know, it can get very serious in writing group, because we get all these tools and tricks and ways to write, ways of, you know, making the same information sound different. And I really grappled with it for the first 2 or 3 years, and then I dropped it. And now it's like riding a bike or driving, you know, when there's a necessity to drop something in, you know, or to change gear or to stop pedaling or to balance a little bit or whatever, you know, it all kind of feels like it's in here now. And I guess it's the same with the principles. And I love, you know, you might know that I work for a Slice of Happiness and we run groups, and my favorite thing to do is the Wednesday night group. We have about 18 people on there, and they've all been through our other groups, and then they get put into this Wednesday night group. Excuse me. And they're all at different places. And of course, they come with different things every time. but they're all at different places. Some of them have seen so much and they've changed their lives, and some of them have just seen enough to kind of, you know, to see that there's something worth listening to. I love running those groups because I go in and say hello to everybody and ask them all how they are, and before we know it, we're in this really rich conversation, and I barely do any teaching at all. I just kind of, you know, do a little bit of that every now and again when people get really caught up in their story and I can feel like it's going in a place that might not be so useful. So I'm very, very grateful to Jacqueline if she ever listens to this recording. Very grateful to Jacqueline for the baptism of fire that was beyond recovery, because it's put me in a really lovely place. So I guess I should ask if there's anything. I guess we're coming towards the end. Oh, Anastasia, you're so welcome. Thanks for the message. Let me just click, because I can't see it all from there. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Oh, thank you, Al, for that. That was just beautiful. Yeah, I just love how you just sort of pointing to that quietness, that presence, that being, and I think with our buddies, almost like, you know, when you write to them in that state, maybe they feel it, see it. It's not always what's in the actual words. It's the, you know, there can be that connection through the letters. You know, it doesn't have to be the face-to-face calls, the in the room, and yeah, and just like listening to them through what they write to you and what's going on underneath the noise, if you like. And like you're referring back to the prison groups, and I've been in, you know, a few prison groups, and they can be very noisy when they start, especially guys who are new to this understanding and don't really know what they're coming to. And I remember the very first group that I sat in on in Onley, which it comprised of probably half the group had worked already with you and Jacqueline and people before, and some of them were new. And it started off so noisy, and the new guys were feisty, and they were like trying to get in there and be the top dog, you know, and somewhere, I think it was later the same day or possibly the next morning, the whole group just fell into this silence, and there was minutes of silence, and it was so powerful. I still remember it as one of the most powerful moments in a group that I've ever experienced. And again, something you shared earlier about your parents and things, I can't remember what it was, but you said something about it's nothing to do with the principles. But the thought that just came straight through my mind is like, it's everything to do with the principles. It's like it is the principles. It's maybe not the intellectual what they are, but it's that, you know, to me, it's that sort of just that beingness that we all have, that connectedness that we all have. So, but yeah, I just think, just thank you so much. You know, it's been beautiful listening to you. So thank you.
Thanks for the invite, Carola. It's been lovely to chat to you. And it's amazing to hear what comes out of my mouth when I'm put in this situation. And just to kind of add, I guess, to that, we don't know what people hear, which is what I heard you say just now. We don't know what people hear, so maybe the words aren't so important. As you know, I used to be a yoga teacher, and so often, you know, when I'm talking about the essence of quietness, I'll talk about, you know, yoga and finding it on the mat kind of accidentally and all of that. And then the client, you know, I'll say to the client the next week or 2 weeks later, How you been? Oh, really good. I loved that conversation last week. You know, when you told me to do more yoga? Well, I'm doing more yoga and I'm just feeling so much better, you know? I never said do more yoga. It's the last thing in the world that I would say to anybody. But they hear that one word and then they create their experience around that one word. And then they come back 2 weeks later and they've got that lovely feeling and they equate it to something. And as you say, it's got everything to do with the principles because that's how our experience is created. But it's got nothing to do with how we describe it. It's got everything to do with how, you know, how gently we hold it, I think. Maybe that isn't true. Don't know. Seems true in this moment. I'm just going to put some power in. But thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
No, I think that makes perfect sense what you just said. And what just came to me, it's about the feeling. It's not about how well we articulate it, including in our letters. It's like, you know, you don't have to be explaining every little thing of what the 3 principles are or replying of specifically to what they've said and how it relates to the principles, but people feel it. And it's the same as when you listen to someone or coach someone, they can come back the following week and something has massively changed for them that you didn't even touch on the week before, you didn't even know about, you didn't even know it was a problem. But they heard something in the conversation or in from themselves in that quietness. And they quite often don't even know what it is either, but something has changed. And I think, yeah, that's like the beauty of these principles. That's just, we never know what people are going to hear, when they're going to hear it. And there's always more to see.
Yeah. One of the most frustrating things I heard that Sid said, and I think it was frustrating because I knew there was some absolute truth in it, but I didn't want to hear it, was that it's in the feeling. Oh, stop talking about the feeling. Just tell me I'm going to feel better. Tell me. I don't want to know about the feeling. And now, of course, the truth is that actually I mostly feel my way through life. You know, I mostly feel my way through these experiences. And I've become really low tolerance to the jangling now. So as soon as I start to get like that, then, you know, the natural thing to do, like, you know, when you feel like you're not balancing on a bike, is just to kind of tip yourself into balance again.
Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Erica. Thank you. So I think, are we finished now, Carola? I don't know what the timing is.
Yeah, we're at the end of our time. So yeah, we're good. Unless Wendy, you wanted to say anything before we go?
No, it's been lovely. It's been just a nice quiet space this year. So yeah. Nice to hear you about your writing. I'm doing Jules' writing course. Yeah, I've done the first one. I'm doing the second one January. And I also include poetry. I think as Carola knows, with my prisoners, I write bits of poetry as well, which mine seems to enjoy. Yeah, been writing to mine for several months, and he's just had a light bulb moment. So it happens when it happens. Yeah, it's nice.
How amazing when you've been talking to him for that long.
Yeah, but you know, I knew the time wasn't important, was it? Yeah, no. It's cool. But yeah, thank you. This has been lovely. Nice space, nice connection. Like we're all in the same room, sitting there with a cup of tea, as I often say. It's lovely. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Lovely to see you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Carola.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.